The sky over City Z doesn't crack like glass. It doesn't split like thunder. It just stops being sky. For 9 seconds, every disaster sensor in the Hero Association goes dark at once, not offline. Overwhelmed. And when the light clears, something is standing in the crater that used to be a shopping district. Green-haired, silent, breathing like the air itself is an insult. The Hero Association doesn't have a name for what just fell out of the sky. They don't have a rank for it either, because their scale stops at God, and this thing didn't even blink walking past that line. Every S-class hero who answers the call finds out, one by one, exactly how far past unbeatable this creature really is. But there's a bald guy in a yellow suit who hasn't gotten the memo yet. He was just headed out for groceries. This is Multiverse Saiyan, and this is What If Saitama Faced Broly. Story by James Phillip. If there's a what if you've been dying to see collide, drop it in the comments. This channel exists because of requests like yours. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stick around. Because what happens when the strongest punch in any universe meets the strongest rage in another? You are not ready for this one. The first sign wasn't the sound, it was the silence that came before it. The kind that presses on your eardrums like altitude, like something enormous is inhaling. City Z's disaster sensors were built to catch monster incursions, energy spikes, ground tremors, the ordinary catastrophes of an ordinary Tuesday. They were not built for what came through above the old industrial district at 11:47 p.m., and for 9 full seconds, every one of them simply stopped reporting. Not damaged, not offline. Overloaded past the point of meaning, the way a photograph left in the sun eventually just burns white. When the readings came back, the Hero Association's central dispatch room went from murmuring chatter to dead quiet in under a second. "Reclassify," the dispatch officer said, voice flat with the particular calm of someone whose hands have started shaking. "Whatever this is, reclassify it. I've got an energy signature climbing off the dragon level scale, and it is still climbing." Nobody answered right away. Screens across the room lit amber, then red, then a color most of them hadn't seen outside of training simulations. A pulsing gold that meant the system itself didn't have a category left to assign. 2 miles away, in the crater where the old Kesho textile warehouse district used to be, the air was still burning. It hadn't been an explosion. Not really. Witnesses who survived close enough to see it would later struggle to describe what had actually happened, because explosions have edges, and this didn't. The sky had simply torn, a ragged seam of green-white light stitched across the clouds for a heartbeat, and something enormous had fallen through it like it had always belonged on the other side. The crater it left wasn't from impact. It was from what happened in the half-second after. A shock wave of raw pressure that flattened 3 blocks of low warehouses like a hand smoothing a wrinkled tablecloth, punched out every window for 600 meters, and left the asphalt in long black scorch lines radiating outward from a single point. At the center of that point, kneeling in a crater still hissing with heat, was Broly. He didn't look around. He didn't seem to register the destroyed buildings, the flickering streetlights, the distant wail of sirens starting up all over the district. He simply knelt there, head down, shoulders working with each breath like a man holding something back, a green-white aura licking off his skin in slow, restless pulses, the way heat comes off asphalt in summer. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were the wrong color for anything that should exist in this world. A blank, glowing white, no pupil visible. No recognition in them at all, just hunger, banked low and patient, waiting for something to fight. He rose. The ground cracked beneath his feet, not from weight, but from the aura bleeding off him, a physical pressure that turned solid concrete brittle. He took 1 step, and every window on the block that had somehow survived the initial blast shattered outward in a single synchronized crash, like the whole street had exhaled glass. Then he started walking toward the city. The first hero on scene was B-Class, a disaster response specialist named Tanaka whose entire resume consisted of pulling people out of collapsed buildings and directing traffic around gas leaks. He was not equipped for this, and he knew it within 4 seconds of arriving, knew it the moment he saw the crater, the scorched trails, the thing walking out of the smoke with an aura that made his hero suit's built-in radiation counter start screaming. He did the only sensible thing a B-class hero can do in that situation. He got everyone he could find out of the blast radius, called it in as a dragon level or higher, and then, against every survival instinct he owned, put himself between Broly and a family of 4 who hadn't made it to their car in time. Hero Association, I need you to fall back with me. This whole block is compromised. Broly didn't stop walking. He looked at Tanaka the way a man looks at a door frame he intends to pass through. Tanaka had exactly enough time to shove the family sideways into an alley before the air in front of him detonated. Not a punch, not even a gesture, just a stray pulse of Broly's aura brushing past him like a shrug, and the force of it threw him 40 meters into a parked delivery truck hard enough to fold the vehicle's chassis around his body. He survived. He would spend the next 4 months in the Hero Association's trauma ward learning to walk again, and he would tell anyone who asked that he'd gotten off light. Dispatch reclassified the threat within the minute. God level, unconfirmed. Every S-class hero within range was activated. Genos arrived 9 minutes later, incinerator cannons already primed, twin jets of superheated exhaust trailing behind him as he touched down in the middle of the widening debris field. He took in the scene with the clinical speed his processors were built for. Crater radius, structural damage patterns, the still rising heat signature moving steadily toward the residential blocks to the east, and made his assessment in under 2 seconds. Threat profile inconsistent with any known monster cell structure. Energy output does not correlate with biological mass. This is something else. Identify yourself, Genos said. Weapons trained. Voice level. This area has been evacuated under Hero Association authority. If you are hostile, you will be neutralized. Broly turned his head. For the first time since arriving, something like recognition flickered in those blank white eyes. Not fear, not caution. Interest. The dull, patient interest of something that had been starving for a very long time and had just heard the dinner bell. He didn't speak. He never did, not really. Whatever language Broly had once possessed had long since burned away into something more elemental, replaced by a low, constant growl that vibrated in his chest like an idling engine. But his stance shifted, weight settling forward onto the balls of his feet, and the aura around him surged brighter. Genos fired first. He'd learned, across dozens of monster encounters, that hesitation against an unknown god-level threat was how heroes died, and he did not intend to become a statistic in someone else's incident report. Both incinerator cannons opened up simultaneously, twin streams of concentrated heat that had melted through demon-level monster carapace in the past without slowing down. The flames hit Broly square in the chest and simply stopped, not deflected, not absorbed in any way that produced a visible effect. They just stopped mattering, guttering against his aura like a lighter held up to a hurricane, and Broly took a single unbothered step forward through the fire toward Genos like it was mildly annoying weather. Genos's processors flagged the failure and adjusted instantly. Heat resistance beyond current combat parameters, switched to kinetic engagement, and he closed the distance himself, driving a full-power reinforced strike into Broly's ribs with everything his frame could generate. It was like punching a mountain that had decided to be offended about it. Broly didn't stagger. He looked down at the point of impact with something almost like curiosity, and then he backhanded Genos without any visible effort at all, a single lazy sweep of one arm, and sent him through 4 separate structures before he finally stopped, half buried in the wreckage of what had been a corner grocery store, systems screaming damage alerts through his internal feed. Genos forced himself back onto his feet, right arm sparking, chest plating dented inward, and did the math the way he'd been built to do it. Current output insufficient. Requires reinforcement or retreat. He chose retreat, which cost him more than the beating had. He fell back to the evac line, transmitting real-time combat data to dispatch with the calm precision of a machine and the quiet fury of the man still inside it. Hero Association Central. This is Demon Cyborg. Confirmed God-level threat. Unknown origin. My output was insufficient to produce meaningful damage. I am requesting immediate S-class reinforcement and authorization to escalate response. The line was quiet for a moment. Then dispatch answered, voice tight. Reinforcement is already inbound. Genos, fall back to the perimeter. That's an order. Bang arrived on foot, which told anyone who knew him exactly how seriously he was taking this. The old martial artist didn't waste breath on introductions or warnings. He simply walked into the debris field with his hands loose at his sides, watching the way Broly moved. The rhythm of that restless, pulsing aura, the way his weight shifted before each step. 60 years of reading opponents had taught Bang that even gods have a shape to the way they fight, if you know how to look. You've done enough damage here, Bang said, low and even, planting himself between Broly and the Eastern Bloc. I won't ask you again to leave peacefully. I doubt you'd understand the words anyway. Broly's growl deepened. He lunged, and for a moment, just a moment, Bang's decades of martial mastery earned him something no one else that night had managed. He moved. He read the strike a half-second before it landed, redirected the sheer, obscene force of it along his forearm instead of taking it head-on, using Broly's own momentum to send him stumbling 3 full steps past where he'd meant to stop. It was, by any measure, one of the most impressive pieces of technique the old man had ever executed. It also did almost nothing. Broly rounded on him with a snarl, faster than something his size had any right to be, and the follow-up strike caught Bang across the shoulder, hard enough to crack pavement 6 meters behind him, where he eventually skidded to a stop. Bang got back up. That too told you everything about him. He straightened, rolled the shoulder that was very possibly fractured, and settled back into a ready stance with the grim, unhurried patience of a man who had faced death before and intended to make this cost something. I'll admit, he said, mostly to himself, I haven't fought anything like this in a long time. Broly didn't answer. He never did. He simply came at the old man again, and the fight that followed, brief, brutal, and one-sided in a way that made the Hero Association's live feed operators go quiet in the control room, ended with Bang alive, barely, dragged clear by 2 junior heroes who'd arrived just in time to pull him from the blast radius of Broly's next unleashed pulse. The association's threat board updated one more time that hour, the number in the corner ticking upward with a soft, ominous chime that every operator in the room had learned to dread. Confirmed. God level. Containment status. Failing. Somewhere across the city, in a cramped apartment with a busted air conditioner and a mostly empty fridge, a bald man in a bathrobe stood in front of a supermarket flyer taped to his wall, circling the day's deals with a red pen and frowning at the units on eggs. Half price after 8, Saitama muttered, checking his watch. If I leave now, I can still make it. He grabbed his coat off the hook, glanced at the muted television in the corner, where a news anchor's mouth was moving fast and urgent over live aerial footage of a green-lit crater, and didn't really look at it. Sirens in the distance were nothing new. City Z had sirens most nights. He shut the door behind him and headed out into the dark, thinking about eggs. The Hero Association War Room hadn't convened a full S-class briefing in 6 months, and the last time it had, the threat under discussion had eventually been downgraded after further scans. Nobody in the room expected tonight to end that way. Sidokai, the executive director overseeing the response, stood at the head of the table with his hands flat against the polished surface, watching live drone footage cycle across the main screen. Genos limping back through the evac line, Bang being carried out on a stretcher he was still arguing he didn't need, 3 more B-class heroes' vitals flatlined on the casualty board. 6 minutes of footage, 4 confirmed engagements, 0 effective damage dealt. "Talk to me," Sitokai said, voice clipped. "What are we looking at?" The lead analyst, a thin woman named Furuya, who'd spent the last decade cataloging every monster incursion the city had survived, pulled up the aggregated sensor data with hands that weren't quite steady. Energy output doesn't match anything in the database. Not House of Evolution tech, not natural monster cell mutation, not Sea King lineage biology. If I had to guess a category, and I don't like guessing, I'd say this thing isn't from our world at all. Extra-dimensional. That's the working theory, sir. The tear in the sky before it arrived. Atmospheric sensors caught a spatial distortion pattern we've never logged before. Whatever this is, it didn't evolve here, and it didn't get built here. It just arrived. Sitokai exhaled slowly through his nose. In 30 years with the association, he'd learned that the scariest threats were never the ones you understood, even a little. This wasn't Boros, methodical and strategic. This wasn't a monster with recognizable hunger or ambition. Every engagement report used the same word, over and over, from heroes who'd fought gods and lived, to describe them calmly. Wrong. Something about the way it moved, the emptiness behind its eyes, the sense that there was no negotiating with it, because there was nothing home to negotiate with. "Who do we have left?" he said. "King is unreachable. Training retreat. No signal." A pause, the kind that meant everyone in the room knew what that actually meant, and none of them would say it out loud. "Tatsumaki is 3 hours out by fastest transport. Blast. No contact, as usual. Metal Bat and Metal Knight are already inbound. ETA 8 minutes. Then we hold the line with what we have until Tatsumaki gets here." Sitokai looked at the screen again, at Broly's aura pulsing steady and patient through the smoke, moving deeper into the city with the unhurried certainty of something that had never once needed to hurry. And God help us if she's not enough either. Metal Bat found Broly 4 blocks further in, standing in the middle of an intersection that had been a bus depot an hour earlier, staring up at a streetlight with something almost like fascination. The first still moment anyone had caught him in since the crater. Bat didn't do reconnaissance. He'd never been built for it, and he wasn't about to start now. He came in swinging, Bat already crackling with electricity, screaming something that might have been a warning and might have just been noise, and the first hit connected clean across Broly's jaw with enough force to have ended most monster fights the association had ever logged. Broly's head snapped sideways. For one suspended half-second, the entire street held its breath. Then he turned back, unbothered. Blood. Actual blood, dark and strange-colored, trickling from a split lip that was already closing, and looked at Bat the way you'd look at an insect that had managed, against all odds, to bite you. "Oh," Bat said, in the small, honest voice of a man recalibrating his entire understanding of the situation in real time. "Oh, that's not good." It wasn't. The exchange that followed lasted 11 seconds, cost the surrounding block its remaining structural integrity, and ended with Bat unconscious under a collapsed bus shelter, alive only because Metal Knight's support drone had yanked him clear a half-second before the follow-up strike landed. Metal Knight's own remote units fared marginally better. His heaviest combat frame managed to actually stagger Broly with a coordinated barrage, 3 seconds of genuine hope flickering through the command feed before the Saiyan simply tore the frame in half with both hands and kept walking. By the time Tatsumaki's transport screamed into range, the association's threat board had stopped using numbers. She didn't bother landing. Tatsumaki hovered 40 meters above the wreckage, arms crossed, green hair whipping in a telekinetic wind of her own making, surveying the crater and the ruined blocks radiating outward from it with an expression that had already decided this whole situation was an insult to her personally. "You're joking," she said to no one, to the empty air, to the city itself. This is what everyone's screaming about? She didn't ask questions. She'd learned a long time ago that questions were for people who thought they might lose, and Tatsumaki did not entertain that possibility as a rule. She simply raised one hand, and every loose object within a 200-meter radius, cars, streetlight poles, chunks of broken concrete the size of small houses, lifted into the air in a slow, deliberate orbit around her, gathering speed, gathering intent. Broly looked up at her. For the first time all night, that patient, hungry blankness in his eyes sharpened into something closer to focus. Here, finally, was something that had announced itself as a threat before it even swung. Tatsumaki brought the full weight of the gathered wreckage down on him in a single crushing telekinetic strike, the kind of attack that had liquefied dragon-level monsters in the past, that had ended fights before her opponents finished registering she'd moved. The dust and debris cloud that resulted swallowed the entire intersection. For 3 full seconds, the association's live feed showed nothing but roiling smoke and the pale afterglow of psychic energy discharging into rubble. Then the smoke parted, and Broly was still standing, aura flared to a blinding, furious white-green cracks of golden light bleeding across his skin, like something underneath him was trying to get out. Not unharmed, there was real damage there, real strain visible in the tightness of his jaw, the first sign all night that something had actually cost him effort, but standing, and angry, genuinely, catastrophically angry, in a way that made the pressure radiating off him double, then triple, windows shattering for 8 blocks in every direction from the sheer force of his aura destabilizing the air itself. "Huh," Tatsumaki said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, there was the faintest crack of uncertainty under the contempt in her voice. "Huh." She didn't get a chance to follow up. Broly closed the distance between them faster than her telekinesis could adjust. She felt it more than saw it, the pressure wave arriving before the movement did, and the strike that followed sent her through the upper floors of an apartment tower hard enough that the entire structure groaned and began to lean. Tenants long since evacuated, but the building itself, now a ticking hazard of its own. She pulled herself out of the wreckage 40 seconds later, coughing dust, one arm hanging wrong, murder in her eyes, and found, for possibly the first time in her career, that the calculation in her head wasn't how do I end this, but how do I survive long enough to figure out how to end this. Central, she snapped into her calm, voice tight with a fury that was mostly aimed at herself. Reroute everyone else out of this block. I mean it. Everyone. This thing isn't a monster. I don't know what it is, but it's not a monster. And it's not something I'm finishing alone tonight. The line was quiet for a long moment before Sutukai's voice came back, grim and level. Copy. Pulling all units to the outer perimeter. Tatsumaki, can you hold containment until we figure out next steps? She looked across the ruined intersection at Broly, who had already turned away from her, apparently having lost interest now that she was no longer an active threat, and resumed his slow, patient walk deeper into the city. I can hold him, she said, though the words cost her something to say out loud. For now. Word of what was happening spread through City Z, the way it always did. Half rumor, half real footage, leaking out of association channels, faster than anyone official wanted it to. By the time the eastern residential blocks started evacuating in earnest, most people already knew, in the vague and terrified way people know things during a disaster, that something out there tonight was different, worse, that the heroes who were supposed to fix it weren't fixing it. In a 24-hour convenience store 6 blocks from the perimeter, a cashier watched the muted television bolted above the register cycle through the same aerial footage on loop. A crater, smoke, distant flashes of telekinetic light, and didn't look up when the door chimed. We're evacuating in 10 minutes, she started to say, and then actually looked at the customer and stopped. Saitama set a carton of eggs and a bag of half-price bean sprouts on the counter, patting his pockets for change. Just these, please. Sir, there's a... Have you seen the news? There's some kind of god-level thing tearing through the industrial district. They're saying it took out 3 S-class heroes already. Yeah, I heard the sirens. He found the right coins, counted them out carefully. Kinda far from here though, right? The cashier stared at him for a second too long. The particular disbelief reserved for people who genuinely did not seem to understand the scale of the thing happening 6 blocks away. Then rang him up anyway, because there wasn't really a protocol for this. It's getting closer, fast. You should really head to a shelter. I'll keep an eye on it, Saitama said, tucking the eggs under one arm. Thanks for staying open, by the way. Convenient. He left. The bell over the door chimed once behind him, and the cashier watched him walk calmly down the middle of a street that half the block was fleeing in the opposite direction, eggs swinging gently at his side, entirely unbothered by the green-white light flickering against the clouds 3 streets over. Behind him, the ground shuddered. Tatsumaki's latest attempt to slow Broly's advance registering as a distant tremor, followed a half-second later by the groan of another building losing a fight with physics. Saitama glanced over his shoulder at the light show, mildly curious the way you might glance at a fireworks display you hadn't planned on watching, and kept walking. Man, he said to no one. Every week it's something. Tatsumaki held the line for 11 minutes, which was, by any honest accounting, longer than anyone in the war room had actually believed possible. She fought the way she always fought, sharp, contemptuous, absolutely refusing to acknowledge fear as a category of experience available to her, hurling entire chunks of the ruined cityscape at Broly in overlapping waves, carving trenches through what was left of the industrial district, trying to funnel him away from the residential blocks, buying time with a stubbornness that had nothing to do with strategy, and everything to do with refusing to be the one who lost. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Not against something whose power seemed to have no ceiling she could locate, that got angrier and stronger the longer the fight dragged on instead of tiring the way everything else in her experience eventually tired. By minute 11, she was airborne only because stopping meant falling, one arm useless at her side, blood in her hair, telekinetic reserves burning through faster than she wanted to admit over the comm. Central, she said, breathing hard. I need a new plan, because I am currently the new plan, and the new plan is failing. Tatsumaki, fall back, Sitokai's voice, urgent now, all pretense of calm command gone thin. That's an order. We are not losing you on top of everything else tonight. I'm not the one who's... She cut herself off, ducked a debris strike that would have taken her head off, and didn't finish the sentence, because there wasn't a version of it that didn't sound like an admission she wasn't ready to make. Broly, for his part, had stopped treating her as a priority. Something in him, whatever passed for calculation in that starved, burning mind, had registered that she was contained, manageable, no longer the most interesting thing in range. His attention had shifted east, toward the residential sprawl, toward the dense cluster of apartment blocks the association had been racing for the last 20 minutes to fully evacuate. He started walking again. Tatsumaki threw everything she had left at his back to slow him down, and he shrugged it off without turning around, the way you'd ignore rain. Genos rejoined the fight against 3 separate direct orders not to, systems still flashing amber warnings, one arm running at 60% capacity, incinerator cannons recalibrated for maximum output at the cost of a burnout risk he'd calculated and accepted before anyone could talk him out of it. He found Bang first, the old man upright again against every reasonable medical objection, standing at the edge of the evac perimeter with his jaw set, watching the green glow on the horizon get closer. You should be in a hospital bed, Genos said. So should you. Bang didn't look away from the light. We're not the kind who listen to that particular piece of advice, are we? They went in together, not because either of them believed 2 more bodies would tip the outcome, but because the alternative was standing behind the line doing nothing, while the thing that had broken Tatsumaki walked toward 11,000 people who hadn't finished evacuating yet. Sometimes that was the whole of the calculation. Sometimes there wasn't a better one available. What followed wasn't a fight so much as a delay tactic dressed up as one. Genos drawing fire with everything his overtaxed systems could generate. Bang reading every opening with the precision of 60 years' study, and using each one to buy 3, 4, 5 seconds at a time, the two of them working in a rhythm that spoke to genuine respect built over years of standing on the same side of disasters. It cost them. Genos's right arm finally gave out entirely, sparking and dead at his side, and Bang took a strike across the ribs that put him on the ground and kept him there this time, consciousness fraying at the edges, still trying to get back up out of pure stubborn refusal to be finished. They'd bought maybe 90 seconds all told. It wasn't nothing. In a night defined by how little anyone could buy, 90 seconds was almost generous. It also wasn't enough, and everyone watching the feed in the war room knew it. Watching the threat marker on the map crawl steadily toward the residential cluster with nothing left standing between it and 11,000 people except distance and time, both of which were running out at the same steady, indifferent rate. "Central, this is Perimeter Unit 4, a junior officer's voice broke through the comm, tight with barely controlled panic. "We have confirmed. We have confirmed. Civilians still inside the evac zone. Estimate 200 plus. They're not going to clear in time. Somebody needs to." Sitokai closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, the only concession to despair he allowed himself, and opened them, already reaching for the broadcast channel that connected every hero currently active in the city, the emergency frequency reserved for moments exactly like this one. "This is central to all units. Anyone in range of the eastern residential block, converge immediately. I don't care what your class is. I don't care what your specialty is. We need bodies between that thing and those civilians, now." Saitama heard the broadcast on the little emergency radio bolted to a street lamp 2 blocks from his apartment, the kind the city maintained for exactly this sort of thing, crackling to life with Sitokai's voice stretched thin and urgent, calling every hero in range to converge on the eastern block. He stopped walking, looked down at his grocery bag. Eggs, bean sprouts, a discount coupon for instant ramen he'd been pretty excited about 5 minutes ago. Looked toward the green-white glow lighting up the underside of the clouds 3 streets over, close enough now that he could feel the low, steady hum of it in his back teeth. "Man," he said again, quieter this time, and there was something almost like resignation in it, not dread. Saitama didn't really have room in him for dread anymore, but the specific weary annoyance of a man whose evening kept getting interrupted by things that mattered more than his evening did. He set the grocery bag down carefully on the curb, tucked in against the base of the street lamp where it wouldn't get knocked over. "I'll be right back," he told it, which was possibly the most sincere thing he'd said all night. And then he started walking toward the light, not running, not rushing, just walking, hands in his pockets, the same unhurried pace he'd have used heading to the discount bin at the grocery store. The eastern block, by the time he arrived, looked like the aftermath of something biblical. Whole rows of apartment buildings stood gutted and smoking, streets buckled into ridges, emergency vehicles abandoned at odd angles where their drivers had fled on foot. Tatsumaki hung in the air above the wreckage, barely conscious, held aloft by will alone. Genos lay half-buried near a collapsed overpass, systems critical. Bang was down and not getting up, chest rising in shallow, labored breaths. Metal Bat, Metal Knight's ruined support frames, 3 more B-class heroes whose names wouldn't make the official casualty report until morning. All of them scattered across the wreckage like the aftermath of a storm that had simply outmatched every single thing thrown at it. And in the middle of it all, moving steadily toward a huddled cluster of 200 civilians who'd run out of road to run on, was Broly. Aura blazing white gold now, cracks of light running across his skin like something ancient trying to break out of its skin, every step shaking loose new dust from buildings that had somehow, barely, stayed standing this long. The civilians screamed, A few of the parents at the front of the group had already turned to shield their kids with their own bodies, the useless, instinctive gesture of people who knew it wouldn't help and did it anyway, because there was nothing else left to do. Saitama walked into the middle of it from the far end of the street, hands still in his pockets, stepping over a chunk of fallen concrete without really looking at it. "Hey," he called out, mostly toward the civilians, in the same tone he'd have used to tell someone they'd dropped their wallet. "You guys should probably get behind me." Nobody moved at first, too stunned, too far past the point where a bald man in a yellow jumpsuit registered as anything but one more strange detail in the worst night of their lives. Then one of the parents, some instinct older than logic kicking in, grabbed her kid's hand and did exactly what he'd said, and the rest of the crowd followed in a stumbling, terrified rush, funneling in behind him as he came to a stop between them and the thing walking toward all of them with murder radiating off it in visible waves. Broly stopped. For the first time all night, something had actually made him pause, not fear. Broly didn't have room for that any more than Saitama had room for dread, but a flicker of genuine attention. Here, finally, standing calm and unimpressed in the middle of a battlefield that had broken everything else sent against it, was something that didn't smell like the others. Didn't radiate the low static hum of fear the way every other opponent tonight had, however well they'd hidden it. The growl in his chest deepened into something closer to a snarl, aura surging brighter, brighter. The pressure of it alone enough to crack the pavement in a widening ring around his feet. Saitama looked at him with the same mild, unbothered expression he'd worn all night. The expression of a man evaluating a slightly too large task on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, and finally took his hands out of his pockets. "Okay," he said, rolling one shoulder, glancing back once to make sure the civilians were clear. "Guess I'm doing this." Broly moved first. He always moved first. It was the only opening move he knew, the only language left in him after however many years of nothing but hunger and rage, closing the distance in a single explosive burst that had ended every fight that came before this one in under 3 seconds. Aura screaming, fist already cocked with enough force behind it to have leveled a mountain range in whatever world he'd come from. Saitama's fist met it halfway. There wasn't a sound, not really. Or there was, but it wasn't a sound built for ears to process as sound. More a pressure that hit every eardrum for 6 blocks in every direction at once, and then simply stopped, replaced by absolute silence. The shockwave that followed flattened what little was still standing on the street, punched a visible ripple through the low-hanging cloud cover overhead, and blew out every remaining window in a half-mile radius in one single synchronized breath. Broly's momentum stopped like he'd run into the edge of the universe. For one suspended, impossible second, he hung there, fist still locked against Saitama's, that vast burning aura flickering, actually flickering, for the first time all night, like a bulb about to blow. Then Saitama's punch finished landing, and Broly went through him, through the air where he'd been standing, through 6 ruined buildings behind that, through the crumbling remains of the industrial district beyond, and kept going in a straight, silent line until the distant, muffled boom of impact rolled back across the city, almost a full 10 seconds later, somewhere out past the harbor, past the horizon, gone. The aura went out like a snuffed candle. Saitama stood there a moment, fist still extended, listening to the distant echo fade into nothing. Then he lowered his arm, rolled his shoulder again like he'd stretched it wrong, and glanced back at the 200 civilians standing frozen behind him in absolute, disbelieving silence. "You guys should get to a shelter," he said, "just in case there's aftershocks or whatever." Nobody moved for a long moment. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a kid, maybe 7, maybe 8, tear-streaked and wide-eyed, asked the question every single adult around her was too stunned to voice out loud. "Who are you?" Saitama scratched the back of his neck, glancing toward the direction his groceries were probably still sitting on a curb 3 streets away. hopefully undisturbed. "Nobody really," he said. "Just a guy who was headed home." He turned and started walking back the way he'd come, hands sliding into his pockets, leaving the silence and the wreckage, and 200 people who would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe what they'd just seen to anyone who'd believe them. By morning, the official Hero Association report would list the threat as neutralized, the responsible party unconfirmed, cross-referencing footage that showed a man in a yellow suit appearing for 11 seconds and then simply walking away. Analysts would spend weeks arguing about power readings that made no coherent sense. Genos would review the footage 41 times before giving up on finding a pattern that fit any known combat data. Tatsumaki would refuse to discuss it at all, which everyone who knew her understood as its own kind of answer. Saitama found his groceries exactly where he'd left them, undisturbed, the eggs still intact. He picked up the bag, checked his watch and sighed. "Missed the sale anyway," he muttered, and headed home. The city rebuilding itself in the wreckage behind him, entirely unaware that the strongest thing to ever fall through its sky had lasted exactly one punch against something that had simply been trying to get home before the discount window closed.